Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Zoe Hieronymus, sitting in tonight for Dr. Bob, as I do on the last Sunday of every month. Don't forget to join me on WVIE 1370 AM Sundays from 3 to 5 p.m. for Clearview Radio and from 10 to midnight for Future Talk, which looks at the latest in the kinds of things we're talking about this hour with Dr. Jean Millay, Millay. Her 1999 book, Multidimensional Mind, Remote Viewing in Hyperspace, is literally an anthology catalog of some of the finest research in remote viewing and other psi phenomena. Also, her free CD, so you can learn about biofeedback, help children get it into the school system, use it in youth groups or other community places. Go to www.fmbr.org. So, Jean, we covered really just a little corner of your magnificent book, Multidimensional Mind. So I'd like to talk about another arena, which is that of the imagination and visualization, or the role of images for the human. Because it seems that all sacred societies will teach through storytelling, whether it's an oral story, a painting, or a telling of things that happen in time and place. Why are images so important for us?
Well, actually, we have different intelligence systems, and that's what we found out doing the telepathy. Some people were more dominant in their images. Other people could transmit words better, and so on. But the image language, and that's before literacy, we can see more than we can talk about. And my best remote viewers had been drawing everything that came across their path since they were little kids. They had books and books and books of drawing. They could draw anything, so that if they had an image, something they didn't know what it was, they didn't have to know. They just drew it.
Mm-hmm.
When you have to give a word for something or classify something, that's when error comes in, because then you're limited to what's already in your memory. So direct vision is important. Now, what you perceive is basically what you believe in ordinary thinking and conversation, but in remote viewing, you need to be able to shape color and then go back and try to find out what it's about, rather than seeing suddenly somebody sends a picture of a hat, for instance, and the other person gets exact same shape and color, and it's a flying saucer. It's because it's what they were thinking about. Well, it doesn't you really get off the track that way. We have just as much trouble often talking to each other face to face if we come from different backgrounds as we do try to communicate with them in the next room by closing our eyes. But one of the things that has been very strong with me, and since I was an art teacher for a long time before I got into this field, is that the children learn to see. And color books, I don't like them. They distort the visual spatial perception in many cases. If you're looking at a drawing by Rembrandt, Michelangelo, Leonardo, the feeling sense of three-dimensional space has been captured on a two-dimensional plane. But if your color books and your IQ books, that have little cartoons and little line drawings, and they are done by a person who doesn't understand that, there's many distortions. And for instance, I remember one drawing. It shows a guy trying to saw a log. And the thing the kid was supposed to notice to get credit for an IQ point was that the saw teeth were on the top.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the drawing showed the leg was too long. It was like the thing was floating in space. There are many things wrong with it. And children who actually responded with those perceptions were marked wrong.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling is that as soon as your baby can scribble, you should be given materials to do so. And there's a certain development of the kinds of scribbles, straight lines, circles, a circle for a head, sometimes, the arms coming out. That's a development between their perceptual relationship to the outer world and their inner development. And that should be completed without any interference whatsoever with color, but unless it's, geometric or mandalas or something like that doesn't represent people or animals, things, that they should be encouraged to draw from life. Now, I never let my kids have color books. My daughter, right away, when she was 2.5 and 3, would go down to the ocean and she could draw little shells and crabs and things like that. She carefully looked at them. And as you draw from life, you see more when you look. And as an art teacher, I would have students take turns drawing each other, and then I'd give them a fine drawing by Picasso's early period or by Leonardo or something, and have them make a line drawing and have them make a copy of it, and then go back and look at the person. And it's not that I wanted to turn them all into Rembrandts. It's an important class for a scientist to know what they're looking at and not just be symbolic.
Well, and I think you also touched on something else, which is the feeling nature of relationship to what one sees. And when working with, and Bob and I have worked with all different kinds of children, and some who haven't had much exposure to nature don't have the same kind of sensitivity, I guess, developed that gives them confidence about their own feelings and the feelings they have about the things around them.
Well, it's kind of been educated out, flattened out. It's part of not knowing that they're a multidimensional being. When you're brought up on certain
cement and processed foods, it doesn't lead to great inner creativity. But when you talk about these things, and you talk about them as both an educator and a researcher and a woman, I mean, I have to add that there's this element of intuition that women in particular can bring to any subject and any inquiry, and I think sometimes our outside-the-boxedness is the nature of our womb. And when you have a womb, you have this ability to make space for something else to happen. So share with us for a moment, jumping from biofeedback, where we become capable of self-management for originated elevation that connects us to others. What are some things that the person in the listening audience might do to enhance these aptitudes that they have?
A womb with a view.
That's very good. That's great.
Well, it's finding out that you are a unique individual in a room full of folks that you have things in common, but instead of trying to be like everybody else, the fact that you are unique, if the classroom accepted that, if every kid comes in and say, wow, how are you different, and how are you the same, and we honor that. Mm-hmm. And then the idea that you are a multidimensional spirit who has helped evolve this space-time manifestation, brain-body, and you have your unique memories, you have your unique experiences, you may have brought in your past life experiences, and you see things differently. You may even see further into the visible spectrum than others, and you don't want that educated out of you, that you may see lights around people. You may remember. Now, I have to say, I have to back up here a little bit. After my sister passed on, I asked her, do we really have past lives? Or because we're infinite, eternal beings, is it that we can just identify with any past drama that is appropriate for our goal? Her response is, you perceive what you believe. Mm-hmm. But that is the...
And this is what she said to you after she had already crossed over
Yes.
Okay.
And then what Ruth Inga, after she had crossed over, had indicated is that as the spirit, and this is related to your question, but it's a roundabout way, that the spirit, as the spirit leaves the body, it naturally identifies with its most recent personality.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if there's a limitation, I mean, the spirit world is rich, and she spent her life studying shamanism and teaching that and having these conferences so we could share this information. So she was certainly aware that she could go into the light and be oneness with everything if she wanted to, and she could also be a spirit and enjoy that whole realm that's happening, and to promote the realm of the spirit world as part of her education. So what she said is that if a person dies in anger, like they would in war or in pain, and then they leave the body, they may hold on to that pain and they may hold on to that anger and insist on being born in another society where there's more, where, like one of the ghetto areas where there's massive anger all the time. We do not process our war dead. Some religions certainly will pray for them and so on, but if there's a limited idea that you either go to heaven, hell, or purgatory, and maybe you didn't consider your life perfect, you don't want to go either place. I've encountered spirits that hung out because they wanted to, or Laurel, the healer, her husband, stayed around to help her.
Yeah, Olga is a close friend of my husband's back then. Well, and that's an interesting phenomena, that the soul, being eternal, has an option to choose what school it's going to attend and whether it's going to stay at the house it was born in until their children are all raised and the grandchildren deceased, or to oversee something that's going on in a particular city that they may have spent an incarnation with. So we're always surrounded and interphasing with those that are no longer embodied, but we are entrained to them. And I think any of us who have loved someone, or a teacher or a parent or a grandparent or a child who has passed over, continues that conversation, and sometimes it's stronger than others. So when people, though, and people are always asking me, for exercises that they can do, and one of the things that if you could address, I remember both Ingo Swann and Joe McMoneagle, one of the military remote viewers, said is the greatest development is to learn how to suspend your judgment and not categorize things, but just to observe what you see, or to hear what you hear, and try not to interpret it as much as to come into relationship with it.
Well, that's absolutely true, and that's part of what I was saying before about visions. What you see, you don't have to name it. You don't have to make it fit into any other category.
But we tend to. The mind tends to want to, the left hemisphere wants to analyze and categorize and name things.
We are definitely conditioned to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The process, and we'll get back to seeing, is that by the time, if you actually train people to see more when they look and to remember and to focus, then when they're doing something like remote viewing, you have a very good chance of more success, because you're not calling on a distorted memory.
Mm-hmm.
Among my students in the telepathy, they get a shape and color, they'd get something that, that's like I saw on television, and, he was sitting around watching a lot of television. I still remember a jingle that was played over and over again on the radio for something we no longer use, and that jingle's still there. It had to do with super suds. You don't want a lot of suds in your washing machine today, but back in the 30s, it was desirable.
Mm-hmm.
So those repetition, and those are the ads are repeated, are the first things your little kids learn if the TV's left on all the time.
Right, and it's interesting in the same way. I was thinking about folk sayings, how there's so much wisdom in them, and that there aren't many of them anymore, that it's kind of generated facades, and we're not really even watching stories like traditional storytelling. We're watching, invented drama, and it's a very different thing than something that is told by generations from generation. of an archetypal drama. And
well, there's good and bad with that, because there's some old myths we could do without that are pretty dominant in our culture that are holding us back.
You want to give us an example of what you're speaking of?
Well, I don't want to offend anybody, but let's face it, Genesis is got serious problems. And when you take it literally, you skip history, you skip real knowledge, you skip what the rocks are telling us. To stick with what's written a number of years ago, translated through several belief systems and languages, and and it's been around for centuries and centuries, and it really it's only symbolically related to the formation of the earth and the cosmos and the time and the evolution and the message in the rocks and the ice ages and the warmings and the coolings and all of those things. Once a paradigm is established, it took a couple of thousand years to get past Aristotle's idea that the earth was in the middle and didn't move around. And when Galileo tried to point out, hey, if you look, you might be different, he got into terrible trouble, and it took a long time to accept it even after that. So that's a paradigm change.
Right, and I think in your chapter 9 of your book, where you talk about belief systems and the politics of suppression, and then whether it's atheism or unfounded beliefs or logic that flows from belief or disbelief, I mean, that how we hold something is limiting our vision. And just, we have to take a break, but it reminds me, I tell people, when you can't find something like your keys, it's amazing how the aperture, literally, of your visual intake shuts down when you have emotional distress. And because you think you can't find them, you can't see them, even when they're right in front of you. And I think that all of our life is like that in the spiritual realm. Because we don't think we can see it, we don't. And we narrow our aperture not through greater concentration, but through less attention. And then when we bump into a spirit who's standing in the hall, we feel it, but we pretend we don't. So we'll be right back. Our guest is Dr. Jean Millay, Millay. Learn more about biofeedback and how learning self-management in this way, like the Heart Math Institute teaches, and many others, but broader here, go to www.fmbr.org. Dr. Jean Millay's book, Multidimensional Mind, Remote Viewing in Hyperspace, North Atlantic Books, 2000.
It's the last Sunday of the month, so it must be time for Zoe. Every Sunday from 8 to 10 p.m., you'll find Zohara Hieronymus hosting 21st Century Radio, right here on Talk Radio 680 WCBM.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Zoe Hieronymus. Dr. Jean Millay, Millay, is our guest. Really, folks, if you want one of those amazing books for your library, and if anybody you know in your family is a skeptic, or you yourself just want to deepen and enrich in your understanding of psi phenomena, remote viewing, and many other things, Dr. Millay's book is full of these beautiful color images that were done by those who did the remote viewing and the direct sending and the reception, and it's just a beautiful, comprehensive, I guess more than an introduction, a true overview of where the field of multidimensional mind is in the scientific community. You can also go to the website www.fmbr.org and download a free CD, which is 75 to 80 some pages, that teaches you all about biofeedback and how you can make use of this in the community, in your schools and communities, wherever, to enhance people's ability to really explore their inner life and therefore have greater breadth, I guess, and creativity in the world. When you look, Jean, as you have, at different kinds of logic and realms of non-local space-time, and you described how even you knew of a death in the family because the person after they died had come to you, in the same way I knew my grandfather had died before I was told in a similar way, and many of our listeners have had similar experiences. what about precognition under hypnosis or precognition as a result of a near-death experience? I mean, it seems that sometimes not everybody agrees what precognition is.
Oh, boy. Well, it's one thing to step outside of your space and look at something that's ongoing. That's an easier thing to do. When you're dealing with precog, there'd be several levels. I think that if something's in the works, I mean, something has started. You've shot a astronaut to the moon, and you know the trajectory, and you know you have it all figured out that he's going to land there on, when he's going to land there 3 or 4 days hence. That's a logical progression, and if everything goes right, then he will. If you have a dream about getting on an airplane and it crashes and you decide not to, then your higher consciousness is letting you know that you don't have to take that trip, that you have things to do. And that's another kind. But to, try to read the stock market, you probably had Russell Targ on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Where they, did 9 guesses of the futures market in a row and then turned around and had 9 misses in a row. Mm-hmm. So there's something that has to do with, for what reason.
Yeah, exactly. For
need to
know. Exactly.
If it's urgent and you need to know. Now, there's some folks at the remote viewing who went down and were able to make some money in Las Vegas off a crap table, but I suppose I'd be better off if I did, but I have seen in the past that when you have a need to know, you can get information. Mm-hmm. And when you're doing it for show,
or self-aggrandizement or ego or fame or money,
chances are you're not going to be so accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And
which is interesting because, again, it comes back to the way in which our intention affects the outcome of what universe reflects back.
Well, intention is certainly 75% of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to, there's a lot of us with different intentions. So do we interact, or is there, it's your thing to do in the world, and you're going to just keep doing it against all odds, and then finally something happens. A number of the physicists, Elizabeth, Rauscher, Dean Radin, Russell Targ, Nick Herbert, Saul Paul Sirach, they've been working on these things in terms of physics, and they always come up with some really interesting ideas. I haven't spent that much time on precognition. We didn't do that well in our precognition. I mean, it would sometimes happen. In the studies that I did, if I've sometimes had a premonition that something was going to happen, or I could see, oh, well, price of gold is going to go up, But then that's sort of part of the way it's all going.
I want to switch gears for a moment because I'd also like to touch on trance, but before that, there's terminologies within the sacred societies for different phenomena that the psi or remote viewer would call something else, and I've always been interested in what is called divine grace.
Well, that's great if it happens, At the same time, there is that moment when you're in meditation, or maybe you're just washing the dishes and not thinking about anything else, when a feeling, a light, a radiance can sort of surround you, and you've been touched, and you're going to enjoy it. That something
better than a womb with a view.
Right. And even someone who's had, you would think will have earned some bad karma or have had a lot of bad luck, even though they're sweet people. And you wonder why, and maybe it's buried deep, and then suddenly, it's changed, turned around. Everything looks bleak, and it's turned around, and you'd say, well, that would be divine grace. Then again, maybe, what can I say? These are ideas for discussion. I don't feel that there's any resolution to it particularly.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with you. And so I'm always interested in the big wow things of the mystical path. I mean, it's interested me always that most of the society's teachings are about non-attachment in one way or another. And yet my experience in life shows me that through loving one, you can learn to love all. And I don't look at it as this horrible thing to love animals, to love a person, to love my house, to love, to love what I inhabit while I'm alive. It seems to me that love is love. Anyway, it's just one of those things that the physics part of my intellect tells me love is the field, and it's that which is the glue of the universe. And then you hear these mystical teachings that tell you, well, don't be attached. And I'm thinking, but love is not necessarily attachment as much as appreciation.
Well, my favorite teacher of a while back, Dean Brown, he was a metaphysicist, a physicist. He developed wonderful new toys for...
What did you say his name was, Jean?
Education in computers, and now he passed away a few years ago.
What was his name? I didn't hear you.
Dean Brown.
Uh-huh.
And his final writing, he was translating Sanskrit, and when he was translating the Yoga Sutras, and I was looking for somebody who had the light sculpture, didn't know much about EEG, brainwaves, and somebody who will talk to Dean. Well, in the Yoga Sutras, it says, yoga, which is union with God, is stopping the chitta vritti, which means the vibrations of the mind. So, I hooked him up to the brain machine, and he went into his state. Well, it isn't stopping. If you're stopping, you're out of the body.
Right.
But what it is holding a steady frequency, holding a steady pattern that's even and phase coherent, synchronous. Mm-hmm. Without any distractions in it.
Mm-hmm.
That means you're not talking to yourself. You're just sort of in the flow.
Right, being.
His teaching was the difference between attachment, detachment, and non-attachment. And non-attachment is the way you love the best.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're attached, then you worry about it. When you worry about losing your attachment, or you grieve over losing the attachment. When you're detached, you don't care. But when you're not attached, you care the very best because you can see it as it is and love it as it is. And if the path you're on takes it away, you adjust to that too because you're not so attached that you're, ready to kill yourself.
I like that non-attachment. That's well described. And then another arena that we've looked at over the years on this program, and I think we've talked about to some degree publicly, is how little silence there is in our culture and why many people are drawn to the Buddhist tradition or others where silence becomes a place and an experience, and that it's not empty at all. Share with us what biofeedback and perhaps your own work with children and the use of silence contributes.
Well, it's fundamental, and before we get past Dean Brown, I wanted to say that his final writing is called Cosmic Law. And it's also available on the same fmbr.org. That's the Foundation for Mind Being Research. And you can call it up and get a free download on that too. He didn't, as he was knew he was about to graduate from Earth School, he wanted that to be available to everyone. How
lovely. Cosmic Law. Again, go to the Foundation for Mind Being Research. That's www.fmbr.org. Right.
Okay, now back to your other question.
About quiet. Silence.
Well, we live here. Daryl is an extraordinary genius, and he set this up. The house, it's basically a one-room house, partly underground. The roof isn't underground. That takes too much foundation for that. It faces southeast for good solar activity. The pantry is totally underground. It keeps it at a constant earth temperature. And then, of course, he has his shop, and I have a studio. But he has a passive solar water heater that doesn't take any moving parts. The photovoltaic cells takes care of our electricity, and a backup generator if the sun doesn't shine very long. And we have a natural spring, and the solar power pumps the water from the spring up to the house. So we hear wind in the trees, and we hear birds, and we hear the coyotes howl once in a while. And about 18 deer came by the other morning for the salt lick. But it's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think, oh, gee, I just wish I could turn on the television and watch the news. But then when somebody senses some, or I go down to the city or something and see some, I'm sorry. What you refer to as the Schumann resonance, which is currently called the Ionosphere Earth Waveguide, is
I'm a decade behind on that one, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it'll be called the Ionosphere Earth Waveguide on my chart.
All right.
And it was predicted by Schumann, and then they finally were able to measure it, and then another genius named Bob Beck, who was also graduated from our school, but he had developed the equipment to measure it, and whereas the first paper said 7.5, he really got it down to 7.8,
mm-hmm.
and that's the low level of your alpha rhythm and the upper level of your theta rhythm. And the Native American Rolling Thunder would say, you become very quiet, and then the earth speaks to you. You go up on the hillside and become a rock, so that you're not separate.
Mm-hmm.
And the animals or the plants will provide information, especially if you have you have a question. So that the trees provide information. When Daryl needed to know about a plant and how to cultivate it, and there was nothing in the literature, people seemed to think it was too hard to cultivate it, he went out and sat in the middle of this plant and asked the grandmother plant and gave him a feeling or an image or a thought of what to do. Not words, of course. Now, that's how Rolling Thunder, the Native Americans, how they understood plants, how they understood healing. They had, they knew about all the plants and what they were used for. And, white people came and say, ignorant savages, but they talked to the land they lived in. Mm-hmm. They didn't destroy the land they lived in. They blended in with it. They became it.
Well, and I think that thank God the indigenous peoples of the world have continued these traditions for millennium, and they're intact in the sense that there are still holders of the sacred societies, and other people, when we incarnate perhaps outside that cycle, still bring with us the memory feeling state that culture gives. It's just we seem out of place. Now, you've worked with an awful lot of children, and we're going to take our last break. But when we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we as adults in the community can do so much to really protect children who have sensitivities and awareness and enhance them, because as inheritors of a difficult planetary reality, these aptitudes are really vital. I mean, it's not really optional from my perspective. They're vital tools of survival as well as creative flourishment. We'll be right back. Our guest is Jean Millay. Dr. Millay's book, Multidimensional Mind, Remote Viewing in Hyperspace. You can also go to www.fmb.org and download her wonderful CD on biofeedback and more, and also Dean Brown's work called Cosmic Law. Both are at the Foundation for Mind Being Research, www.fmbr.org.
Free energy from the vacuum using magnets. Radiant potential energy sources are all around us, just waiting to be tapped. Tom Bearden's work with John Bedini next Sunday night at 8, 21st Century Radio, Talk Radio 680 WCBM.
Hi, this is Zoe Hieronymus. Join WCBM and WVIE Radio along with thousands of Marylanders in supporting the Baltimore County Police Memorial Renovation Fund. Send your tax-free donation to the Baltimore County Police Memorial Fund at 9304 Harford Road. That's 9304 Harford Road, Baltimore, Maryland, 21234. And call their office at 410-668-0046. That's 668-0046, and ask about their Memorial Fund poster to display in your community.
It's the last Sunday of the month, so it must be time for Zoe. Every Sunday from 8 to 10 p.m., you'll find Zohara Hieronymus hosting 21st Century Radio, right here on Talk Radio 680 WCBM.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Our guest these past 2 hours has been Dr. Jean Millay. Her book, a 1999 release by North Atlantic Books, Multidimensional Mind, Remote Viewing in Hyperspace. You can also go to the Foundation for Mind Being Research at www.fmbr.org and download her free CD, which will show you all about biofeedback. It's also a teaching manual. You can use it in the schools or in community groups or for yourself, for your grandchildren, for whomever it is you wish, or just to learn more about something you may have always had an interest in and never followed up with. Dr. Jean Millay's Multidimensional Mind, Remote Viewing in Hyperspace is really a must-add to your library if you're looking for an overview with detailed, and I do mean detailed on every page, beautiful color prints and drawings from experimenters' actual way in which they do the work they do, whether they're in close or distant proximity. So, Jean, before the hour is up, I know there were some things about trance that are probably important to add, because sometimes people go into trance from desire, sometimes through ritual, sometimes through shock, sometimes just hypnotically, as you point out, through entrainment, whether it's television or repeated message. What is trance, and what happens to us in that state?
Well, there are different kinds of trance, but what happens and why it's different from ordinary consciousness is that when you synchronize your brainwaves, then you have the opportunity to choose to go there. If you've had a shock, as you say, you might just suddenly find yourself there. One of the more interesting ones is Luis Gasparetto. I don't know if you've talked to him.
No, I haven't.
He's an espiritista in Brazil. Now, a spiritista is a whole religious organization where they talk to spirits, and they count on doing that. I think Allan Kardec went there in 18-something or others and talked to people about that.
And the Spiritist Society, which is a worldwide society, work with that.
Yes, and there was in the Philippines as well. Well, I was in Brazil. I had a chance to go to a meeting there, which was very interesting. But Luis Gasparetto, his mother was a spiritista, his grandmother, and so on. He, as a young boy, found that he could go into trance and paint pictures that the artists, of different artists. And he would either close his eyes and rub paint on his hand. He'd get the colors right first, or rub paint on his hand, close his eyes, and paint a picture. And this one was supposed to be Rembrandt, and that one was supposed to be Monet or Manet or Van Gogh or whoever. Now, when he was at the Washington Research Center many years ago, he agreed to be filmed, and usually he does this in semi-darkness, and he likes music in the background. So, but he was willing to do this with light so it could be videotaped. And in the space of less than 2 hours, he painted about 15 paintings that are like 20 by 30 board. And he even did one with his feet. But we took him over to the lab to see what his trance state was like and what it was like to have spirits talking to him. And his state is very different than my own, so I'm assuming that there's a lot of differences. But he said he could, at one time he did a painting of 2 portraits simultaneously, one with each hand.
Wow.
That kind of impressed me. And
stereo. Stereo reception.
Well, that's what he said. Sometimes he would have a different artist on each side of his head or operating each hand. So I said, right, come to the lab and let's take a look at the chart recording.
Mm-hmm.
So he did. And we asked him questions, and he spoke with a Portuguese accent, but when we asked him, the spirit theoretically was Toulouse-Lautrec, who spoke with, and they were speaking English, but with a French accent.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of very interesting information. But when I asked him if he could ask the spirits to switch sides, the chart recorder showed a switch.
Interesting.
Now, that was quite a number of years ago, and I haven't been able to find anybody who was, willing to follow up on that research. But there's a great deal to be said here. Now, James Fadiman, have you ever talked to him on this show?
No, I haven't.
Wonderful, wonderful. He gave a talk at the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology in Prague a number of years ago. I have the tape. I play it over again on multiple personalities. And so that brings us to possession.
Mm-hmm.
And how one person knew who he was supposed to be that day because he had a different prescription for glasses for the different person who was going to be controlling him that day. But possession, now it's funny to talk about these things, but I think today, with the post-traumatic stress syndrome,
right.
For some people it's just the horror of the war they're in and the fear and the constant pressure. But for others, either the enemy or their friend they were trying to save and couldn't may have followed them home.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for those that are sensitive, and I'm sometimes a little too sensitive and aren't so great at keeping things out from my environment, I've brought home antiques sometimes and get the memory shadow of the person who own them, and I have to have a conversation with them to tell them, that I'll take good care of it. They can let it go now. And so that was one of the questions I wondered about, the difference between, and we've done numerous shows on the difference between hauntings and poltergeist and spirit resonance and trace memory. But when we put them all together, what we're talking about are sometimes the after effects of consciousness.
Yes, thoughts are left into things. It's part of the reason why some psychics working for the police, they want to have something that belongs to that person.
Mm-hmm.
From the many people that are around that, with their energies, it's a way of focusing.
Right.
Some don't need it, some do.
Which one could say every system of belief is a way by which we then can operate?
Well, let's say find a system of beliefs that works.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my statement.
Mm-hmm. And
is
so
that real magic, and I'm talking about what we're talking about here.
Right.
Real magic is telepathy, spiritual healing, psychokinesis, whatever. Real magic can be created by anyone by maintaining an intention, a steady focus of intention through an appropriate belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And that appropriate belief system is important because there are some things that totally will not be possible in the laws of the cosmic consciousness.
You know, it's interesting. You bring to mind a discussion I had with Joseph Allen, who was one of the Apollo 7 astronauts who was responsible for all the Apollo flight communications. And I asked him on one of my shows whether the astronauts had ever discussed the power of human consciousness, that eventually we could use the Earth as our ship, and that the Earth itself would be the humanity ship that we operate through consciousness. And I was so surprised when he said, yes, we do talk about things like that. And I was, grateful to Edgar Mitchell and others, who have joined the program, who have talked about this awareness of the allness, of the oneness, and as you have. But we have just a few moments left, and I know your passion, Jean, is in children and in helping our youth, because that is our future. What would you like to say to our audience with the remaining few moments we have?
We are a spirit occupying and guiding and growing and being part of the personality, mind, brain, that is for the moment in this space-time frame. We are not limited to it. It is important for children to know that if they have a memory of a past life, somebody doesn't say, oh, don't be silly, or you're just imagining things, or if they have an imaginary friend, that these things are honored. They're dreams. If the family is together and a child wakes up and they say, well, what did you dream last night? And they share their dreams, and then these things become real. These things become something that they know. They go to school and somebody says, oh, you're so stupid. They know that isn't true. Mm-hmm. They might have a limitation in learning math, or, I don't play the piano, but it doesn't mean they're stupid. It means that they have something to do. They're here, and they find their own way of who they are and why they came and what they contribute to their family, their community, their world. We all have something positive to contribute. The present school system is designed for madness. I've taught in those schools. Mm-hmm. And I understand why they got upset, 30 years ago or so, when I was teaching in a ghetto school, and the kids were graduating from high school without learning to read past the third grade level. Mm-hmm. And their parents didn't, and their parents didn't. And the Spanish-speaking and the Black Americans were always violently opposed to each other. Now, part of that is because there's no respect. And there was one other thing that I wanted to say. We've created a lot of refugees in Iraq. But what we have here is not illegal aliens, but refugees from two corrupt governments, theirs and ours. And that has to do with the drug war, it's badly managed, that has to do with the lack of understanding of people, taking care of people. Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you. I mean, we unfortunately have to say goodbye. You have a lot of deep and loving thoughts for the world, and obviously a great deal of compassion that comes from your awareness of how we are connected and how we can enhance that connection. So, if 21st Century Radio can be of service to you in the future, Jean, as you move into other areas, we'd love for you to revisit us. And I thank you for joining us for all of this evening.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to express these things I've been mulling over for 79 years. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. May you have many more, and thank you all for being part of 21st Century Radio.